Hey, this is Daniel Lepker, still filling in for Kit at Hardlands Media. Today, we are here with...
My name is Alex Billet.
So, Alex, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a lifelong socialist, or have been lifelong at least. My adult life, I've been a socialist and an activist in various anti-war and anti-racist campaigns. And I'm also a writer and editor, founding editor of Wedge magazine, which is a Marxist arts and culture publication.
So, before we started, you were saying you've been on this path for a very long time. For a lot of people, again, our listeners are very used to us talking to people like yourself, but for a greater audience, what got you down this path?
Well, it was the late 90s, if you want to go way back to when it all kind of started. And there was the battle in Seattle in 99. There was the Free Mumia campaign. And then around 2000, there was the campaign for the third-party campaign of Ralph Nader. And these were, I think all three of these were actually really big formative moments for me. I was about 17, 18 years old, and mostly just angry at the world, but I had no idea where to actually direct that anger. And kind of was listening to punk rock and hip-hop and hated the suburbs where I grew up, hated high school, hated everything. And I think, honestly, just because of that fairly unremarkable teenage angst sort of coming into its own during that moment of history, it was pretty easy for me to find and identify with socialist politics. And so I joined a socialist group. I joined the International Socialist Organization, which I was a member of for 15 years. Still think it's an excellent group. And have been a Marxist ever since. Try to be as humble one as I possibly can, to teach myself and admit when I'm wrong and everything. But this is sort of the framework, the way in which I look at the world, that keeps revealing totally new facets of not just life as we live it right now, but life as it could be, as a more fundamentally democratic and fulfilling endeavor, as opposed to just working to make someone else rich for the rest of your life. And Marxism, I think, and the socialist ideal is it's what continues to make sense of the world and make sense of existence in some ways for me. So.
Okay, so on that note, we have a lot of stuff that's happening around the planet today. One that's very big, very prominent right now, besides here, is all the way in Europe. We got the G20 summit. We have a lot of protests there. I heard about 100,000 people. You have a lot of world leaders. What does that represent to you?
And to me, it just represents, I think, what so many of the protests actually, for example, the battle in Seattle 15 years ago, or God, more than that, 18 years ago now, that there is overall, I think, a growing sense that the massive institutions that somehow claim to not actually run the planet, but clearly do, the G20, the G8, G7, whatever you want to, the IMF, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization. These are institutions that do not work in the interest of the majority. And I think there's always been, especially since really neoliberalism came into its own in about the late 80s and early 90s, there's been a growing sense among working class people, not just in the West but around the world, that these institutions aren't about equitable distribution of resources or anything like that, and they want a more fair and democratic order that actually gives people the lives that they deserve.
So how do you see, right now we're in a socialist conference for 2017. Where do you see this movement, other movements like it? How do you see them, I guess, coalescing to challenge this power?
That's a really big question, and I don't know if I actually have an answer for it. But I think that what draws people out onto the streets quite frequently isn't some sort of generalized analysis about what's wrong with the world. It's this kind of gut reaction of seeing a specific kind of injustice that'll pull you out there. You know, a black man getting gunned down by the cops, or a black woman getting beaten to death by the cops, or cuts on your own campus or in your own workplace. These are what draw people out, and I think there's always a contingent of when these new movements come about that are reaching broader conclusions, more systemic conclusions about the nature of capitalism, the role that oppression plays in propping it up, the nature of exploitation when you go to work. I think that core that is starting to, I mean, I guess you could say it's the woke core of all of these movements. It's starting to grow, and I think that's spurred forth by so many other things around the world, including here the election of Donald Trump, the complete ineptitude of the Democrats to actually provide any kind of resistance. Where does it go from here? I don't know. I think that right now is probably, well, what I do know is probably in my entire adult life, I've never actually encountered a point in history where it's this easy to be a socialist. And I don't want to say that it's not challenging, that there's not red baiting, that there's not a campaign against left-wing professors or workers and things like that. You know, we absolutely have a lot of slogs ahead of us. But I think right now it's probably there's more young people and people generally starting to identify as socialists in this country, which is so crucial considering that it's the heart of world capitalism right now. So I'd like to think that will continue to grow, continue to learn, continue to strengthen itself so that it can be influential in every workplace, campus, and community.
Now, I know this is a big disagreement. I don't really think it needs to be a disagreement, but that's just my opinion, that a lot of people are saying, well, there's really two choices. You can either build a movement outside, either, I guess, the Democratic Party in this case, or you can go inside and overtake the Democratic Party, or I guess the third option, which is doing both. Where do you fall on that line?
I fall in an incredibly skeptical area in that in that debate that I think is but I think that kind of skepticism, I'm trying to actually not let it demobilize me. Like, one of the things that I think the Sanders campaign showed is that even if you're in the Democratic Party, there is still the possibility for mobilizing around something that is substantial, that is principled, limited though it may be. Sanders has a lot of problems. He's horrible on Israel. He's horrible on foreign policy. But he campaigned around an open, democratic socialist, well, more a social democratic platform. And that has helped us get to where we're at right now, what I just described, where more people are identifying as socialists, where there is more space, more breathing room. It's, for lack of a better term, cooler to be a socialist if you're young now. But I think Sanders didn't win the nomination, and that's entirely because the Democratic Party is a capitalist party. It is, I think as someone put it, the second most enthusiastic capitalist party in America. And you can't make the tiger change its stripes. Now, that's not to say that I'm actually very open to arguments, certainly more open than I was this time a year ago, of like sort of limited campaigns on Democratic ballot lines of open socialists. And I know that there's a growing number of people in different city council races and state legislature races who are running on Democratic ballot lines, but also running as socialists, as members of DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, so on and so forth. I'm willing to actually see how far we can take that. But I think ultimately it's going to get, the sense I get is either the Democrats are going to absorb and sanitize all of this, or we are going to have to, at one point, just split this it's tough to talk about splitting the Democratic Party because it doesn't operate the same way that, say, the Labour Party does or the European parliamentary political parties do. So what are you actually splitting? I do want to win people away from the Democrats into an independent socialist working class organization ultimately. But I think what we do in the meantime is open to experimentation, shall we say. So.
I think it's been a very interesting conversation, and it's been very nice to talk to you. Thank you again. This is Daniel with Hardlands Media, signing out.